Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I apologize for this inconvenient time. Early morning is not a good time for journalists. Most of them are quite busy late in the evening, but we didn't have any other slot because Mr. Jahan is very busy, has very busy schedule, and he is leaving tomorrow. Today, our guest speaker is Mr. Selim Jahan, who will speak on this Human Development Report. He is director of UNDP Human Development Report Office, and definitely all of you know that every year UNDP issues this Human Development Report, which was initiated in 1990 by Dr. Mahabubul Haq and Amartya Sen. They together worked on the first report, and since then, every year UNDP is issuing the report focusing on various aspects of development, particularly human development. And this year's report focuses on this work and development, relationship of work and development. And this report are quite elaborate. This UNDP of this Human Development Report has an office which works throughout the year, and also they assign outside contributors who also work on that, and eventually come to this conclusion of the report. So this year's report, it's, as I have mentioned, that relationship between work and development. So there have been development going elsewhere, everywhere. Job opportunities is being created, but still nearly 1 billion workers in agriculture and health sector and other are contributing to this progress. However, the world has also been witnessing violation of human rights, shattering of dignity, and threatening of freedom in the forms of forced labor, child labor, human trafficking. And these are the issues that 2015 report is covering, focusing on. And I'll not detail all these issues because our distinguished speaker will focus on this. Just a brief introduction of his speaker, Mr. Selim Jahan. So Mr. Jahan is the director of UNDP's Human Report Office in New York. And previously, he was director of the poverty practice in UNDP's Bureau for Development Policy in New York from 2007 to 2014. But before that, he worked almost for a decade with the team of Human Development Report. So he's a veteran of this report activities. And today, he will speak on 2015 report. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Selim Jahan. Would you like to speak on podium or sitting?
Podium would be better.
Podium would be better, yeah.
Sorry. Is it on or?
This is on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haq. It's a pleasure to be at the FCCJ. I know of this particular club for many years, even though I did not have the chance of visiting this club. But I'm thankful to you all for making time early this morning to be here to listen to the Human Development Report 2015. Work is the defining issue of our time. This is a challenge that every society is facing around the world. And the world of work is also changing very fast, with implications on human development, some positive, some negative. The Sustainable Development Goals, or 2030 Development Agenda, also refers to work. So these are precisely the reasons why work for human development has been chosen as the theme for 2015 Human Development Report, because we thought that if not now, when, and if not us, who? In that broader context, This morning I will basically concentrate on three fundamental questions. First, what are the basic messages of 2015 Human Development Report? Second, what are the fundamental findings of this report? And third, what are the kind of the policy options that the report suggests in order to enhance human development through work? There are 5 basic messages. 1, work is broader than paid jobs or employment. From a human development perspective, the notion of work embraces unpaid care work, voluntary work, creative expressions like music, literature, painting, etc. Because all this kind of work also enhance human capabilities and create human opportunities. So the first basic message is work is a broader notion than the narrow concept of paid employment or jobs. The second message is the world of work is changing very fast. The what, where, how, when, and who of work are changing quite fast around the world with major implications for human development. The third basic message is there are significant gender imbalances in work, both paid and unpaid work, again with severe implications on women and society as a whole. The fourth message, sustainable development goals and sustainable work are mutually reinforcing, and both are needed for each other. And finally, if we want to enhance human development through work, it is imperative that we should have a set of concrete, pragmatic policy options as well as an action agenda. With those basic messages in place, there are again 5 fundamental findings of this report. 1, over the last quarter of a century, impressive progress has been made on many fronts of human development, and work has contributed to that particular progress. The work of 1 billion of people engaged in agriculture, the creativity of 450 million entrepreneurs around the world, the helping hands of 930 million volunteers have contributed to human progress. And impressive progress has also been achieved because more than 2 billion people have been lifted out of low human development, and more than 1 billion people have escaped extreme poverty over the last 25 years. Yet, significant human deprivations persist, and a huge human potential remains unused. 795 million people suffer from hunger, and there are 800 million adults who are illiterate. Every minute we are losing 11 children. Every hour, 33 mothers are dying while giving childbirth. There are 800 million people who have been termed as working poor. They're all working all right, but they're living on less than $2 a day. The basic message is that if we want to accelerate human progress and also want to overcome the gaps in human development, it is essential that the links between work and human development should be made stronger and systematic. The second finding is work intrinsically enhances human development, but there is no automatic link between work and human development. There are more than 168 million children who are working as child labor. And 21 million people are in bonded labor. Their rights are violated, their capabilities are shrunk, their dignities are shattered. There are certain work which also put people at risk. Every day, 30 million people go to work in mines, and we know that what sort of dangerous conditions they face while working in mines. Therefore, the links between work and human development are not always positive. There are some work which damage human development. There are some work which put workers at risk. The third fundamental finding is the world of work is changing very fast, both in terms of content as well as its modus operandi. And the two drivers behind that kind of change are, first, globalization, and second, digital revolution. Today, the global trade in goods and services stands at $23 trillion, which is almost double the amount we used to have about 10 years ago. More than 7 billion people have mobile subscriptions, and more than 3 billion people use internet. So we live in a world which is globalized and digitally revolutionized. But one has to remember that this globalization and digital revolution create opportunities, all right, but they also pose risks. There are winners as well as losers. If we look at the global value chain of work, 453 million people are engaged in it, of which 190 million are women. But at the same time, 1.5 billion people are in what we call vulnerable employment. There has never been a better time to be a worker with high skill. There has never been a worse time to be a worker with low skill or no skill. The income difference or earning difference between highly skilled workers and low skilled workers are diverging, and the differences are growing bigger. Today, the top 1% of global population owns 51% of global wealth. So therefore, the changing world of work is creating the kind of the inequalities that we are seeing all around the world, both in terms of outcomes as well as in terms of opportunities. The fourth fundamental finding is that sustainable development goals and sustainable work actually reinforce each other. If we look at the sustainable development goals, there are goals related to work. Goal number 8, which talk about productive and inclusive growth and decent work. Similarly, sustainable work can also help achieving sustainable development goals. For example, goal number 1, eliminating extreme poverty, or goal number 2, ending hunger. But if we want to forge the positive links between sustainable work and sustainable development goals, 3 things have to be done. First, there has to be a kind of termination of certain work, as Poland has been doing with its coal industry for the last 25 years. Second, there has to be transformation of some work. For example, bringing in labor standards in the ship-breaking industry, which employs thousands of people in many economies. And third, there has to be creation of new work. For example, if there are 6 economies in the world, USA, China, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, and India, devote 1.5% of their GDP to renewable energy sector, every year 14 million jobs can be created. So those are some of the areas of new work where we have to invest, where we have to innovate, and where we have to invent. The final message is there are significant gender imbalances in both paid and unpaid work. We have looked at the time use surveys of 63 countries, which accounts for about 68% of global population. Men dominate the world of paid work. Women are mostly engaged in the world of unpaid work. In the world of paid work, women are disadvantaged in terms of participation, representation, and pay. While 72% of economically active men are employed, the comparable figure for women is only 47%. In global businesses, the women's share in senior management is only 22%, and 32% of global businesses do not have any women at senior positions. Globally, women earn 24% less than that of men. Even when we talk about senior managers, the female senior managers in Latin America earn only 53% of what their male counterparts earn. This is an economic loss. If the inequality at work between women and men are removed, in sub-Saharan Africa alone, the GDP of that particular region will go up by $74 billion every year. This is a missed opportunity. When it comes to the world of unpaid work, the major burden of that particular work fall on women. For every 4 hours of unpaid care work, women carry out 3 hours of work, men 1 hour. In sub-Saharan Africa, women spend 200 million hours every day just to fetch water. Now, with demographic transition, societal transformation, changes in the structure of the family, the care burden will increasingly fall upon women. And the global epidemics like Ebola and others will make the situation even worse. In order to address some of those challenges, 3 things need to be done, or 3 R's have to be made sure. First, we have to reduce the burden of care work on women. Second, we have to rebalance the roles of and responsibilities of women and men in both paid and unpaid care work. And third, we have to recognize the value of unpaid care work. The third issue and the final question is, what are the kind of the policy options that we have suggested in this particular report? The whole chapter 6 is devoted to policy options. I'm not going to bore you with all those details, but the policy options have been clustered in terms of 3 clusters. 1, strategies for creating work opportunities for both women and men. Second, strategies for ensuring well-being of workers, both in terms of benefits as well as their rights. And third, strategies for targeted actions for certain specific groups. But I would like to highlight some innovative and new ideas that we have put into the report in terms of policy options. 1, we have suggested that developing countries should consider having national employment strategies. Employment has been out of fashion for quite some time. And maybe this is the time to bring it back to the development debate, development discourse, and development dialogues. Such strategies can be integrated into the overall national development plans, like the 5-year plan, or the poverty reduction strategies that many countries have. 27 countries have adopted such an approach, and with good results. Second, for too long we have been told and taught that if there is economic growth, there will be employment. But economies after economies, societies after societies, we have seen the phenomena of jobless growth, where economic growth has taken place, but jobs have not been created. So the time may have come that rather than thinking of growth-led employment, why can't we think about employment-led growth? Why can't we create jobs in those sectors where poor people live, try to enhance their skill, try to raise their productivity, which would lead to further growth and further employment or work creation. In that particular fashion, we will create an upward spiral or a virtuous circle between employment and growth. Third, most of the central banks in the world have one mandate, and that's inflation targeting. We are proposing that central banks may consider having dual target, inflation targeting as well as employment targeting. If that is done, then the monetary policies can really help fiscal policies in creating jobs opportunities, in creating work opportunities for everybody. We can have specific credit mechanisms. We can use the monetary policy instruments to help with the fiscal policy instruments to create a condition where more jobs and more work opportunities can be created. There are countries, and that's the fourth issue, where there are lots of social protection schemes, like Bolsa Familia in Brazil, Prospera and Oportunidad. Similarly, there are countries where there are employment guarantee schemes. For example, the NREGA, or National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme in India. What we are suggesting, can we integrate these social protection programs with the work creation programs so that you can have this dual objective achieved in many economies? Fifth, we're also talking about flexible working arrangements, paternal leave, and other kinds of measures so that women, if they decide to join the labor market and work outside home, they have a conducive condition so that they are not constrained by different kind of the lack of policies in order to have contributions in the outside world. Apart from the policy options, the report also talks about 3 sets of action agenda. First, we are suggesting that we should have discussions, dialogues, debates in many societies for a new social contract. After the Industrial Revolution, after the Second World War, the kind of working arrangements that we have in terms of the employers, employees, and the state, the structure of the work, the benefits of the work, the rights of the work, actually constitute a social contract. But now we are in a situation where people are working remotely. People are also working not within any kind of institutional arrangement that we are aware of. A new informality has emerged, and that's not the traditional informal sector. The crowd workers are working. There are workers who are working remotely and in different modus operandi. Who is going to ensure their benefits? Who is going to ensure their rights? Therefore, maybe we should talk about a new social contract where we try to address the rights and the benefits of this kind of workers, the rights and benefits of part-time workers, the rights and benefits of temporary workers. Second, we are also suggesting there has to be a kind of a global deal. Yes, at the national level, there are laws, there are legislations for protecting workers as well as for protecting their rights. But sometimes we know there are externalities. There are criteria, there are demands by the consumers around the world or the buyers around the world for certain criteria. And in order to fulfill that criteria globally, it may be necessary that we can talk about a global standard, at minimum standard for workers' rights, workers' safety, labor conditions, and that kind of thing. And there is a need to have a discussion on that. And finally, we are also reiterating the concept of decent work, which has been put forward by ILO in terms of creating work opportunities, labor standards, worker rights, and social dialogue, and so on and so forth. In conclusion, we live in a world which is unequal, unstable, and unsustainable. When 80% of global population owns only 6% of global wealth, the world is unequal. And the sources of instability can be many, ranging from economic and financial crisis that we have seen in 2008, 2009, natural disasters, as we have seen in different parts of the world, or just violent extremism. Shocks and vulnerabilities would be the norm of our time rather than an exception. And we have to be prepared for that in terms of policies as well as approaches. The world is unsustainable, and there has been a big discussion on the whole question of sustainable development goals last year, and I don't want to just repeat what has been discussed there. Now, the choice is ours. We can pursue business as usual, or we can try to address this kind of challenges that we have before us. Work can really help overcome some of those challenges. But that work has to be decent, environment friendly. That work has to be quality work, gender sensitive. That work has to be sensitive to the benefits of workers and the rights of workers. And as I have said, the choice is ours. We can pursue that kind of a path, or we can do business as usual. But the point is that the kind of the choices that we make today would determine the kind of the world that we will be living for our children and grandchildren. And who doesn't know that in the ultimate analysis, human destiny is a choice and not a chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Selim Jahan. And now the floor is open for Q&A session. And please raise your hand, come forward, introduce yourself, and then ask the question. Imad, will you please come forward, because it's recording, yes? So. So Imad Azami is a journalist from Lebanon, and he's also vice president of FCCJ.
Thank you. It was very interesting what we heard. But before going to the third word, from where I come, before going to a undeveloped country, I would start by the United Nations. At the level of United Nations, you mentioned average and percentage. Can we know the average of women employee at United Nations regarding men?
I think I'll take that question in two aspects. Even though the Human Development Report has the UNDP logo, let me remind ourselves, this is an independent report. It is a report to UNDP, and it is not a report of UNDP. So therefore, I don't presume that I know everything about United Nations. what are the kind of the percentages of men and women that are employed in the United Nations. But I can say that in UNDP, in the senior managements, out of the 8 ASGs, we have around 5 who are women. I also know that of the resident coordinators that UNDP has in different parts of the world, about 45 to 50% are women. I also know that among the professionals, more than 50% are women. But I can only talk about the organization which hosts this particular report. I do not have any knowledge about the representation of women and men in other UN agencies, or for that matter, for UN Secretariat, because in a way, I do not represent the whole of United Nations.
Just a reminder, Imad, that this year, the new Secretary General will be nominated of the UN. The talks is going on. A female might, for the first time, become Secretary General of the United Nations as well. So there is progress going on over there also. And you mentioned that you are from third world, but Lebanon belongs to high human development category, number 67. So you're not from that lower grade of countries. So rather quite high human development index.
And if I may remind you, I also come from the third world.
My mother came what we call first world from France, but my father, it is by maybe polite, they say third world. It should be maybe 10, 11, 20.
Okay, floor is open again. Please raise your hand. Yes, please, gentleman over there.
My name is Khalil Hassan. I'm Ambassador of Bahrain. I'm very, very impressed by presentation. A lot of important issues and details, and very short time. It was very precise. I have 2 questions. The first, when we talk about GDP, we forget an important part of work being done. Raising families, women who are at home, and developing the future generation. Now, we talk a lot about women work, but we don't consider an important part of women work is what they do at home. What are we going to do about that? We push women to go and work outside. But at the same time, we don't prepare the environment for them that to create a balance between their work at home and their work outside. And that sometimes creates a lot of imbalance in the family and development of the family. The second question I have, inequality. We are seeing huge inequality. What caused this recent inequality which everybody is talking about? Thank you, sir.
On your first question, I fully agree with you that the work within the household is very important for 3 reasons. One is the work within the households actually, while you are raising your kids, you are basically making the future generations. You are enhancing their capabilities. Second, work within the households is important because in many cases, you are looking after who are sick, who are elderly. And third, work within the household is important because from a human development perspective, without that work, you cannot work outside. So for those things, those are important. The question that we are raising, is it inherently the women's responsibilities for those things? And we are not suggesting in the report that women should go out and do the work. What we are suggesting in the report, if women choose to do so, they should not be constrained either by policies or by social norms to make that choice. Because in many cases, women make that constrained choices. They are constrained there. And if I may remind you, sometimes women make adaptive choices. In the UN itself, we have seen that if husband and wife both are working, when husband goes for a new assignment, in most cases, the wife also leaves her job and follows the husband. In a very few cases, I can tell you, when the wife moves on for her career development, husband leaves his job and follows the wife. That does not happen. That is what I call adaptive choices, because women are adapting to the choice which is not a choice, basically. And women are constrained that if they decide to go outside, there are not policy framework, there are not facilities, there are not positive social norms to allow them. How many organizations in the world, including the UN, have the adequate creche and childcare facilities where mothers can put their children and can work? And in many developed countries also, you do not have that facilities. So while recognizing the value of housework, unpaid care work, what we are suggesting here, that is a joint responsibility. And I think in many societies with the younger generation, the things are changing where men also are taking care of that particular responsibility. It should not be two different worlds, the outside world for men and the inside the housework is women. That's where I think a lot of the issues are there. On the whole question on inequality, that's a very difficult question. I mean, the sources of inequality are coming from different angles. One is the wealth distribution historically that we have seen. But today, the major source of inequality is the inequality in opportunities. Often we talk about inequalities in income, inequalities of outcomes, but if you look at inequalities of opportunities, that actually ultimately produce the inequalities in income or in outcomes. I give you a very simple example. In many developing societies, in education, there is a dual system. There is an educational system for the elite. There is an educational system for the commoner. Now, the children who go to the elite schools, they are exposed to a number of things. They are exposed to different languages. They are exposed to different kinds of the information and technology mechanisms and the facilities. Therefore, they are well prepared, or they have got the backing of competing in the global labor market, and they are become high skilled. If, on the other hand, you go to a school which is not so elite, you do not also have the kind of the facilities which the other sets have. As a result, you may come up with an education which is not as good as the education of the other side. So what happens then? You become kind of a low-skilled workers. And when you are a low-skilled workers, you are not allowed to go beyond the borders of your own societies or countries, and you do not have enough job opportunities within your country. So therefore, you are creating a kind of an opportunities which is polarizing the two things, and that actually accentuate inequalities there. The third thing, the sources of inequality also comes, I think, is in terms of policies. If you look at the subsidy structure of any country, and we know that in developing countries there are subsidies on electricity, there are subsidies on water, there are subsidies on energy. The subsidies are meant to be helpful for the poor who cannot pay the full price, so you are giving subsidies. But in most countries, when you do the research, you find that the major beneficiaries of the subsidies are the richer people. And the poorer people do not get those kind of the subsidies. So at the policy level also, you have a policy bias towards the rich. You have a policy bias to the urban areas. I mean, if you compare between urban and the rural areas, the facilities that you have at the capital, facilities you have the big cities, you do not have these kind of facilities in villages. We are more interested in investing in secondary hospitals in urban areas, in better school in urban areas, but not in the primary mother and child care in rural areas, not in the primary schools in the rural areas, and that goes for infrastructure. So I think all these forces, the policy biases, the initial inequalities in wealth distribution, the whole question of the inequalities in terms of opportunities, create the inequality within countries. Then if you go beyond that, we also know that there are inequalities between countries. And in many cases, number of countries, groups of countries, the developed world will not allow sometimes the same kind of opportunities to the developing world in terms of trade, in terms of capital movement, in terms of, for example, the mobility of people. So it also creates inequalities around the global scenario or global landscape. So the synergies between these global inequalities, inequalities between countries, and inequalities within countries end up in a kind of a situation where we see the inequalities. My last point on inequalities, there is also an intergenerational inequality. When we consume, when we lead a life, when we try to encourage growth, we are basically focusing on the present generation. But we have to think that our consumption choice, our lifestyle, the kind of the growth that we are generating, are we also reducing the opportunities and the choices of the future generation? I think that is an important issue. That is the crux of the sustainability that we are talking about. It's not the environment itself. It is basically the choices between the present generation and the future generation, the opportunities between present generation and future generation, the life of the present generation and future generations. Are we dealing with that issue from an equality point of view?
Yes, floor is open again. Yes, please, lady.
Good morning, Dr. Jahan. My name is Akiko Suzuki of the Asahi Shimbun newspaper. Very nice meeting you. I have one question, which I hope you don't think is away from today's topic. What do you think are the things essential for a country to be called a developed country? I'm asking you this because we, the Japanese, often enjoy the privilege to be called, you know, the developed country, but at the same time, I'm sure we are missing or losing often the case in some aspects. For example, the equality for men and women, I think we are losing for the situation of the developing countries or the third world, I think. So what do you think is needed for a country to be called a developed country? Thank you.
You have asked $1 billion question. I'm not absolutely sure. If you ask anybody, any expert, what is the definition of developing country? I don't think anybody can answer that question. There was a time when we used to call underdeveloped countries. When we were growing up in the 70s, we heard about that, underdeveloped countries. I think out of a kind of a kindness to that kind of situation, the word developing has been invented. Because developing doesn't have any boundary, you see. Developing means it's a continuous process. So I asked that question to a number of experts nobody could give me an answer to that. I think it was in the 1950s, if I remember it correctly, on the basis of some kind of a population growth rate or something like that, this kind of things have been adapted. The whole question of the developing and the developed country, I mean, this is, in my view, is something that we have to reconsider, this kind of definition, because I don't think there is a very strict definition. There may be some loose understanding. If I can use the example of the South Korea, whether it is developing or developed, or if you use the example of China, developing or developed, we don't know. But what I can say, that at one point there was also this whole divide of North and South. If you remember it, there's a North and there is a South. In my view, whether you called it a developed country, there is a developing segment in it. And what you call a developing country, there is a developed segment in it. We always say that USA is the largest, most powerful nation in the world, most developed. But there is also, if I may use your term, third world, there is also a third world in the US. So there is a North in the South, there is a South in the North. I think for every country, the focus should be that there are certain development challenges which need to be dealt with. For example, if I take the growth challenge, the question that needs to be asked is whether you are growing by some islands of growth, whether that growth is inclusive and broad-based. In many countries, the growth is propelled by a particular sector. If it is an extractive industry, like Angola, it is basically that diamond industry which is creating the 13% growth. If it is a country like India, in many cases, the growth is coming from the IT sector, for example. So on the growth issue, there has to be inclusive, broad-based growth, number one. Number two, which I have alluded to, that whether your growth is also creating sustainable livelihood or people or not, or whether your growth is being generated by capital intensity, capital use, but not necessarily by employing people. Third, one has to look at it, what is growth for? Economic growth is nothing but intended and unintended consequences of millions of human activities during a year. Nothing less, nothing more. There is no magic about economic growth. That is what economic growth is. Now the question is, the quality of growth is as important as its quantity. Who is creating that growth? Where is that growth being generated? Who is benefiting from that growth? I think that's an important question. Is the growth being translated into better human lives in terms of better education, better health outcome, better access to basic social services like water, sanitation, and everything? If it does not, that growth is basically a kind of a growth whose quality is very low. We know that growth can be job creating, growth can be jobless. Growth can be poverty reducing, growth can be ruthless. Growth can be participatory, growth can be voiceless. Growth can be culturally enshrined, growth can be rootless. Growth can be environment friendly, and growth can be futureless. For development, we do not need growth which is jobless, voiceless, rootless, ruthless, and futureless. Fourth, a country cannot claim to be developed if there are serious gender inequality in every aspect of life, in terms of opportunities, in terms of responsibilities, in terms of roles, in terms of contributions. Because you cannot claim to be developed if 50% of the population are left behind. And finally, I think a country cannot say that we are developed if it is basically developing by borrowing it from the future generations. A country can have a 40% growth rate if you just destroy all your if you use all your natural resources. We work 24/7 a year. You can have 40% growth rate. But the question is, what are you leaving behind for the future generation? So if you want a one-liner, a country is developed where Nothing is left behind, and nobody is left behind.
Floor is open again. So I have one question that is, I take this opportunity to ask a question. That is, there is ranking of countries in human development indices.
Correct.
So I find that Japan is
20.
number 20, behind Republic of Korea. Is there any reason that Japan is falling backwards, it seems, from previous reports? What are the reasons?
Okay, let me answer it at 3 levels. I think Japan has been 19 last year, and this year it is 20. Okay. I think there are 2 things that need to be looked at. One is that one problem with the HDI ranking is that whenever that report comes out, people open table 1, goes to the ranking, looks at the ranking, and tries to compare it with the favorite country that they have. So if you go to Sweden, the first thing they do is basically to find out where Norway is. And if you go to India, their main interest is where Pakistan is. For me, the whole question of ranking are a little bit misleading, because suppose both of us are running from here towards the end of the room, and we are side by side. By the time we are there, we may be side by side. Does it mean that we have not made any progress? It does not. So if you look at Japan, the ranking is 20, but if you compare the value of HDI of Japan between 1990 and 2014, in 1990, the value of Japanese HDI was, if I'm not mistaken, 0.1814. Now it is 0.890. There has been a change of about 10%. So that's one. That's a progress. Second, I think it is also equally important to look at the ranking of the HDI and the ranking by income. And the ranking of HDI of Japan is 7 steps more than the ranking of income. So if you rank income, Japan by income, it would become 27 actually. So which means Japan has been more successful in translating its income into human development outcomes. That's second. Third, I think there are 3 dimensions of HDI. One is life expectancy, in terms of which Japan is well ahead of most of the countries. The other one is education, expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling. If I'm not mistaken, Japan's expected years of schooling is 15 years, mean years of schooling is 11 years. But then the Japanese per capita income is $39,000 in PPP terms. If I compare it with Norway, Norway is $62,000 PPT terms, because they also have oil in the Northern Sea. So I think given that it may so happen that the ranking of Japan may be below South Korea, but what I would be looking at is what happened in terms of the trend line, whether it is going up, whether it's consistently going up, number one. And the second thing I would look at, what is the ranking of HDI vis-a-vis the ranking of income. My last point is, we have to remember that HDI is a single number, but it only looks at, for example, 3 basic dimensions. A long and healthy life, which is represented by life expectancy, education, which is knowledge, which is represented by education, and decent standard of living, which is represented by per capita income. But if we go beyond the single number, there are other indicators of human development which we have to look at. The maternal mortality rate in Japan is 6 per 1,000 live births. In USA, it is 28. The adolescence birth rate in Japan is 5.4. In USA, it is 31. So we also know that in Japan had the highest number of patents in 2013, which means the creativity, the innovation of Japanese innovativeness has come out. So when we compare Japan with South Korea or other places, I think we would also try to look at it from a broader perspective of human development. If I can use a metaphor, and that's my last point, the HDI is basically a door, and the comprehensive human development indicators is a house. So my only plea would be, don't mistake the door to be the house, and don't stop at the door, enter the house.
So we have time for one last question. Yes, Imad, please.
I highly appreciate all your explanation, valuable explanation and lecture. But I would like to highlight on a point the inequality between men and women. In some about opportunities and facilities given to some women. Some women cannot, in many countries, cannot vote in election, cannot drive a car, cannot travel alone. What do you think? You have any answer about this to push for equality between man and woman?
I think you are better placed to answer that question, that you would be neighbor to that particular country rather than I.
So, you are a diplomat.
I think you can actually enlighten us on those things, because you are very close to the question, to the country that you are referring to. I'm far away from that particular country. But no, jokes apart, I think women should have equal rights definitely in every country. I mean, there cannot be unequal treatment of human beings because of men and women, because of disability, for example, because of ethnicity, because of race. And that should be the kind of the equality that we are striving for. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellency wanted to make some comment? Yes.
Sorry. United Nations created when, many years ago, decades ago, when the concept of state developed. Now, today, we are in a globalized world. And this global world again needs a global institution. What is going to happen to United Nations as a new concept for dealing with the challenges of a global world? Thank you, sir.
I think that's an important issue, and the Human Development Report for the last 25 years has been addressing this issue. Because you are absolutely right. I mean, we are more accustomed to nation states and national boundaries and that kind of thing. With globalization, some of the issues which are important for countries are becoming a little bit irrelevant. If I talk about the economic policies, for example, sometimes the policymakers within a particular country have little autonomy to make that policies, because whatever policy you make, the kind of the impact from the global policies, global issues try to influence that particular thing. I think we have made that point 92, 93, 94 reports and everything. And the point has three basic dimensions. One is, if we talk about human development, if we talk about development in a globalized, interdependent world, that would first mean that we have to review some of the global institutions that we have. Some of the global institutions have been created long time ago in the context of the situation that they were in. For example, some of the global institutions have been created just after the World War, Second World War, and to deal with this. So that's one point. The second point that we also have highlighted this year's report and earlier reports also, the global landscape is changing very fast. For example, the global growth centers have shifted, and it has shifted to, say, Asia. The whole question of the North-South divide is no longer as relevant as it used to be. There are lots of South-South collaboration. Within the South, there are big Souths. If I take BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, or BRICS, or whatever combination that you take, the voice of the South have become more important there. And the third issue is that I think there needs to be a lot of discussion and lot of dialogue about the global institutions that we have, whether these are the Bretton Woods institutions or other multilateral institutions. One of the issues that people are talking about, what should be the kind of the voting rights of these institutions. There are also discussions, even within the UN, whether there should be expanded Security Council. I mean, there are discussions about that. Whether there should be new role for Economic and Social Council or the ECOSOC. And I think the discussion is going on, and my own personal feeling is as the world is changing, the landscape is changing, the demography in different countries are changing because of global mobility of people, there has to be some changes in the global institutions and the global governance. What that form would be from now on in 20 years, in 30 years, I don't know. But I know that with the global agenda, global changes, and the interdependence going on, there will have to be changes in the structure, in the representation, in the role of different global institutions so that they can actually address the challenges as well as the opportunities of the global world that would be emerging in future days.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We have already overshot our allocated time, and this concludes today's press conference. And thank you, Dr. Selim Jahan. And as a token of appreciation from the club, I would like to offer you 1-year guest membership on behalf of the club. Please come back whenever you are in Tokyo.
Thank you.
And enjoy the facilities of the club. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.